Hello. Wherever you are in the world today, thank you for joining us for the Rise Traveler, unpacking conversations of sustainable travel. We're here to move a step beyond the Instagram-ready world of travel and think critically and deeply about how travel can uplift global communities, protect natural ecosystems, and be a source of growth for travelers. Here at Rise Travel Institute, we are committed to empowering travelers and travel professionals through education. Our programs, research, experiential journeys, scholarships, and free resources are all aimed at bringing you closer to a more responsible and ethical travel experience. Learn more by visiting risetravelinstitute.org.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the Rise Traveler Unpacking Conversations of Sustainable Travel. I'm super excited today to have Roni Weiss from Travel Unity with me. So, Roni, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want to get started with your background. How did you come to find Travel Unity, and what really led you to focus on diversity in travel? Give us a little background on that first.
So I've been running an event in New York called the New York Travel Festival. I'd also been working with Africa Travel Association,
Okay.
and I became aware of how African American travelers and professionals felt marginalized. So within the event I was running, talking about sustainability and innovation and storytelling. So we had this
Mm.
ability to address these topics. So in 2015, we had a session called Traveling While Black. It was all Black women. And
Mhm.
there was just this sense of these conversations need to actually keep happening. And having them once a year as part of a conference didn't seem like enough. I also
Yeah.
had been working with young people in a variety of ways for many years. And having worked with people who were either in the travel industry or who transitioned into it, they didn't always think about travel as being something that they were actively pursuing. It either was naturally part of their lives or kind of clicked for them. So for somebody who travel was not a part of their lives to be able to say, hey, this can be for you no matter who you are, those were the beginnings of Travel Unity, and we've grown from there since 2016.
Okay. And so, one thing that I think is important for us to both kind of talk about as we're kicking this off is one, leadership in tourism is mostly dominated by white faces. And clearly, we're two white faces having this conversation today. So, I do want to acknowledge that before moving forward too quickly. But I am curious, how does your identity um, inform your work in diversity? And also, how does it affect your experiences as a traveler? Because you do travel quite a bit.
So it's interesting because I'll go much younger. Um, when I was a kid, I was diagnosed with ADD. I ended up going to community college when I was 10, got my associates at 12, et cetera, et cetera. So I was in college and university young. I ended up with two bachelors when I was
Oh,
18,
wow.
Bachelor of Arts. And the thing for me was I had thought, oh, I outgrew this ADD stuff. But what I
Mm,
had really done was I just started traveling and I was constantly stimulated by things.
yeah.
So I built my whole life basically around being ADD, and I was scared to death of the idea of a 9 to 5 job.
Mm,
Um, so having started, Travel Unity and doing this work, it's been a journey for me understanding what neurodivergence is. And I
yeah.
think a lot of times, yes, we should acknowledge that race and ethnicity are real and there's privilege and, all that sort of stuff. But for us as an organization, um, a, a- making things only about race and ethnicity loses the fact that people are more than just that one thing.
Yeah.
And being somebody whose brain does not work the same way that others do is something that I've had to accept and figure out how to navigate this world where I'm engaging with neurotypical people who are not
Mm.
seeing things the same way. Then my travels, not only am I a white guy, I'm a 6'5" white guy, and
Okay.
it's one of those things where I'm a big believer in neutral ignorance. And I didn't really know my privilege. When
Yeah.
I was hitchhiking and staying at random people's places that I met on a train and stuff, it took me many years to realize that potentially if I was just a shorter white guy, I wouldn't be doing that, let
Yeah.
alone female, let alone, any other array of different identities
Right.
that led me toward the types of travels that I had. So I think when it comes down to it, yes, privilege is real.
Mhm.
It's not 100% privilege. Not every space do I come in privileged. But where I do come in to spaces, I do try to make sure that people are being heard and that I'm hearing people. And I think that's the core of the work. And then acknowledging that when people are traveling, their concerns and needs are different depending on those identities.
And I think that, sharing that your history, especially with ADD and being neurodivergent, really does bring up a great point is sometimes we don't think about those, I'm going to say, quote unquote, hidden identities that we can't see straight from just looking at someone's face. And so I'm really glad that you were able to kind of share that. And I kind of just want to dive into the meat of our conversation, if you don't mind today. But I'm really curious on from your position and all the work that you've done, how do you think the current administration's policies are affecting Americans and affecting travelers outside of the US?
So let me just quickly say, I run a nonprofit, Travel Unity, and we're focused on making travel welcoming to everybody.
Yeah.
So overall, I the, there's the world have been in anyway, and there's the world we're in 2025. And
Yeah.
I don't want to lose sight of the things that have happened and continue to happen in 2025. But I think as we come back to that original identity question, um, it's not everybody feels welcome everywhere, and not everybody is welcome everywhere, right? There's this foundation and baseline of us needing. This is why diversity, equity, and inclusion, while it is a term, is where it's at right now. They're reasonable bullet points because there are people of different identities, and if we're not setting up structures that are equitable for them to feel included, then things are not going to progress.
Mm,
Problem is that there is now a sort of more active, no, you are not welcome aspect of things that makes it worse.
right.
Um, so, yeah, I just want to, before we get too far into the meat, I want to acknowledge that by saying, oh, no, this is just the current administration that's doing this, ignores the fact that a lot of these things happen anyway, and or have been happening, and are part of just society and global engagement of people not feeling welcome, both implicitly and explicitly.
Yeah. So then what, even if someone isn't officially, let's say, barred from travel or, has that very clear stamp of you can or you can't do that, because I think that's part of what we're going to talk about too is the uncertainty of what the administration's policies really are and when do they change and how often they're changing. But I'm curious as to what are some of the psychological and logistical barriers that people are facing because of these policies that you've heard from your interactions with your members and people in your community.
Well, I think, one of the things that we need to acknowledge is that people uh, make decisions on their travels or their purchasing based on a variety of things. So even if somebody's not banned, even if somebody's not worried, if they're coming from a place of privilege, they might just not want to spend money in the U.S. as a non-American, a foreign traveler from the perspective of the U.S. because they don't want to look like they're supporting what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and in the case of Canada, which was completely decimated in terms of Canadian travelers to the U.S., they they were told that they don't even have a country.
Right.
So what is it to go to a place to say, oh yeah, no, I'm going to go anyway? There's other places they can go. So I think just that first level is people just choosing not to come because they don't want to look like they're supporting and because they can make other choices, their purchases. Beyond that, those who are choosing to come for whatever reasons um, are gonna potentially have just the hairs on the back of their neck up at all times because how are they going to be treated at the border and how are they going to be treated where they go along, and depending on what you look like, right, there are U.S. citizens. I've had this conversation with colleagues where they're married to somebody who is Hispanic, or they within their Hispanic families are like, you're a U.S. citizen and you need to carry your papers around at all times. So if I'm somebody who looks like I'm foreign, given everything that's happening, you know, maybe you would say, oh, it's good to carry your passport around all the time anyway. But it's one thing to just kind of have it there. It's another to have it because you are worried about what might happen to you if you left it at the hotel, at home,
Yeah.
your car.
Well, and I think that, there's a lot of, like you kind of kicked it off, there's a lot of people completely changing their travel plans and not traveling to the United States because they are worried that they're going to get stuck at the border and detained and who knows how long. And, I work with quite a few Canadians, and we've had to completely reschedule different work gatherings that we were doing because we can't our Canadian, coworkers don't feel comfortable coming to the US, and they are hearing stories about people that are getting detained at the border for really no reason. And, they have kids and other responsibilities. And so I think there is that risk factor of, well, even though I'm going for work and, we're still trying to quote unquote do business as normal, it's still that place of anxiety that is creating this divide in whether they feel comfortable even coming to do business with us.
I've been to conferences this year where Canadians have said they've lied to their coworkers and maybe even families. I don't know. It wasn't totally clear, but
Yeah.
about where they were going. They
Really?
came to a conference in the U.S. Yeah,
Wow.
and and then obviously there's all the sort of Canadians who might normally be going to some of those conferences who just aren't.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I'm kind of curious too from your conversations and interactions, is there something or things that you've learned from travelers or the travel professional industry that others might not realize are happening? Is there stories or anything that you're hearing that is kind of unique to your conversations that you've been having?
I think that it's sort of the opposite in all honesty.
Okay.
I think that it's the nobody knows anything thing. When you
Right.
have somebody is making decisions that seem to be grounded in little to nothing, you know, the rest of the administration doesn't know what's going to happen. So
Right.
there's no inside knowledge to have because things can change on a dime. And I
Right.
think that's the thing that's toughest. Again, I think it's the flip side. People want to be like, oh, well, I just don't know what's going to be happening. So as long as I talk to somebody who does, then I'll have a better grounding. Or at some point, somebody's going to tell me what happens next. There's no way to know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And when decisions don't seem to be grounded on anything in terms of logic or even coherent policy or goals, no, we're going to be living in sort of tumult because that's the only thing that can happen. You can try to anticipate stuff, but it doesn't seem to be logical.
Right. And so then that's going to make it super hard for any travel organization to really respond to the needs of travelers really impacted by these restrictions or discrimination. Have you seen any organizations though that maybe are worth highlighting of how they are handling this very difficult situation?
I think that it's an interesting question in terms of who's doing this well. But
Yes.
I'm a big believer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the reality is that some people are making decisions that I don't agree with and I think are premature, but are
Mhm.
coming from a place of fear. Where they're like, yeah, no, nobody's making me do this right now as a travel organization, as a leader in it. But I see the writing on the wall, or I'm worried I'm going to have to do it. So I would rather make those choices now and be deliberate about it
Mhm.
rather than be forced to do it later. So it's hard for me to begrudge the folks who have been shifting. I think that the one thing I do that does bother me though
Mhm.
are that at least in a private conversation, I would hope that somebody could acknowledge that they are making their shifts. Because I've talked to different people like, oh, we're not changing anything. We're still doing the work. We've removed DEI from all of our pages, which I accept, you know. but we've removed LGBTQ plus from all of our pages. That I accept less. Again, if you're doing that and there's a choice and you're understanding you're making that choice, but to claim that that is still doing the same work to me is not accurate.
Interesting. And so then, what do you wish more travel organizations or travel professionals really understood about the impact of, I'm going to say, the choices that they're making right now on tourism, on traveler safety, on the industry as a whole?
So I'll give you a much more boring answer than you want, which is I
Honey,
think
come
that
on.
I think that a lot of organizations, not that I'm avoiding the question, but just
Right.
what I see as the actual problem. A lot
Yeah.
of organizations flounder anyway. They don't have plans. They don't have core values. They might have a mission that's been what they've done for years that they don't think through or come back to. So to me, a lot of the foundational issue is that organizations do not have, and the individuals in those organizations do not necessarily have values that they have figured out that they live by. Because the ones I have seen as the bright spots. And we work a lot with NTA, National Tour Association, which is part of the Beyond Borders Tourism Coalition with American Bus Association and Student Youth Travel Association and some others. They're doing that because they know who they are and they know who they are in the space. And they're pushing back in a way that I'm very heartened that they're doing it as early as they are and that they've started doing this work and they are being thoughtful and true to their members and the impact that these things are having on their members. But I think all of that required and requires to know who you are to begin with.
Yeah.
Because if you don't and you're just reactive, for years I've said that reactivity is the enemy of DEI. You need to be thoughtful and doing this work. And part of that is knowing who you are. Because otherwise, what comes next? Everybody will point to Target as being the worst example. And what was really funny to me is, nobody's saying, oh, what about Tractor Supply Company or John Deere? The reason that they feel so betrayed is because they believed that Target was as it had presented itself. And at that point, I was tracking the different sort of DEI walks. And Target's was really interesting to me because the person who made the statement was the person who was in charge of the DEI stuff, which is different than some of the other statements where it was the CEO or even a kind of disembodied corporate voice. They said, no rules were being affected, no money, nobody's getting fired, whatever. Okay, good so far. But then the third thing was that they were going to be walking away from their supplier diversity stuff. And that's the core. Oh, sorry. They were going to be walking away from the supplier diversity stuff, but they still were going to be doing, celebrating Juneteenth and Black History Month and Pride and whatever. So basically, they said, no, don't worry. We will be crassly commercial. We won't do any of the actual stuff behind it, but that's all okay. And I was like, all right, that doesn't seem great to me. And it wasn't great for them.
Right. And I think again, as followers, as consumers, as humans, we really want to stand behind when we understand what the organization's bigger, deeper why is. And with all of the people that I work with, and I do marketing and messaging coaching for business owners, and so we always say, when you can create that mission and that movement behind your bigger why, those are those loyal fans that will love what you are putting out there, that will stand behind you, and you're creating that community of belonging. And I totally agree with you. The Target example is a great example where they had created that community of belonging and then came out and said, JK, LOL, we're not actually doing it, but we're not completely going away from it. So I do think that it gives us something harder to hold on to when we can really understand that larger why. And if organizations don't have that to begin with, of course, right now is just going to be like a ping pong table where you're going back and forth and being very reactive to everything that's happening. So I really think that's a great example. When we think about our listeners, the humans that are here kind of tuning in, and especially those who work or study in the travel industry, how can we be better advocates for more inclusive, more equitable travel experiences?
I think the first thing is just recognizing that everybody has different experiences, different lived experiences. And then from there, it's coming from a growth mindset, a place of curiosity.
Mm,
Um, I think, for probably most, if not all, of people who are listening to this, they already are listening because they want to learn, right? So I think in some ways it's more about not letting you get in the way of yourself, of going, oh no, I made a mistake, or
okay.
centralizing yourself and your own sense of guilt, or really this needs to be about other people. So I
Yeah.
think that's the first thing for everybody who wants to be doing anything for other people, is make it be about the other people.
Mm,
So once you're trying to say, okay, what is it to be in these people's shoes? What are their concerns? What are their needs? It's then going into these different aspects of identity and acknowledging that there are things that are very specific depending on the groups we're talking about. We talked about, neurodivergence. We haven't talked about disability in the broader sense of, mobility and hearing and vision and all of that. But there are very specific needs that somebody has to have those experiences. I think that, one thing that we as an organization are always talking about is how do you maintain the quality of your product to make sure that everybody is getting it and not getting discriminated against or having something worse, but also the equity part of it is adjusting based on those needs.
right.
So always centering on within the industry and within the product, what is the product that we want everybody to experience, and what are the barriers for folks to have that experience, and how do we eliminate those barriers to the best of our abilities.
Mm. I really think that you're right about the mindset piece of it too, Ronnie. And I'm really glad you pointed that out, because I do feel like sometimes we do get into that guilt trap where we don't feel like we're doing enough. And maybe we see other people doing things out there that we're not quite comfortable doing. And so I think it really is having that gut check with yourself of, one, what is your comfort level? And two, what is your time and availability? And really making sure that you still are living that full balanced life, and being true to yourself, and really trying to create those deep connective curiosity driven experiences so that you can continue to learn and grow. It doesn't mean that as an advocate you need to always have all of the right answers, but it does mean leading with that curiosity and question and heart for others. I think is really, really important when we're going and advocating for other communities outside of ourselves. So I think you really bring up some good points there.
I think the other thing I'll add is the idea of justice is a really tough one. And
Oh yeah.
certainly as individuals within our lives, we can be finding ways to do that. But there are very, very few for-profit organizations that can purport to do justice, that have any time or bandwidth to do it. So I you really need to have a lot of foundation before you're even claiming as a for-profit organization that you're doing anything related to justice. So I would, think about what is that distinction as somebody who might believe in the concept of justice. Yes, how are you doing that? Maybe outside of the work environment, um, thinking about it within the work environment, but acknowledging that there are massive limitations, because if the goal is bringing in money, in and of itself, there might be some things that then become difficult when you're thinking about justice.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great point. And I'm actually really excited to ask you this last question that I have for you today, Ronnie. If you could look into your crystal ball, what would you hope to see the future of those communities and people that have been affected by the recent policy changes? What's your hope?
I mean, my hope, in all honesty, is that people do more grassroots engagement with local politicians, which
Yeah.
is something I've talked to our association partners and have seen to some degree happening, where within the U.S. itself, we have a system of checks and balances that is off kilter.
Yeah.
And to be able to have people who are going to their elected officials and saying, hey, this is impacting me personally, this is impacting me professionally, my hope, and I know that a lot of people think it's naive, but if enough people do that in enough places, then having at least some cracks in what's happening to have that pushback there is something I'd like to see in U.S. policy. But beyond that, there are a lot of things we could still be doing that are within our sphere of influence. And having the awareness and the ability to go, okay, what changes can I make and focus on that. Again, nothing against advocacy, right? Go and do it, but don't let it be somebody else's responsibility to make the world better.
Yeah. I like that. Don't make it someone else's responsibility to make that world better. And when we can really express our stories and share those with those who are in the legislative positions, that gives them that wider perspective that, again, we talk about our human experiences. Not every legislator or not every human is going to have that same experience. And so when we can be open to conversations to share those stories and share how things impact us and share with curiosity and no judgment, I think those conversations to be had are really, really something to look forward to and something that does bring me hope. So Roni, thank you so much for joining me today. Is there anything else I should have asked you today that I didn't ask you that you want to share with our listeners?
No, but would love to hear from folks. Feel free to reach out. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn and elsewhere. And you know, I've always appreciated the partnership that Travel Unity and Rise have had. So this is another kind of touch point in that relationship.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on and kicking this series off for us. I really appreciate it. And that does bring us to an end of our journey today. So if you've liked what you heard and you want to hear more, please subscribe, like, or comment. You can always follow us at Rise Travel Institute on Facebook and Instagram, and obviously follow us on our YouTube channel and the podcast platform that you may be listening to us on today. And just remember, here at the Rise Travel Institute, we do believe conscious travel can help us create a more just and equitable world. So if you're a college student planning to study abroad, a tourism professional who maybe wants to create a more equitable and inclusive industry, or really anyone who is currently traveling the world and wants to understand how to travel in a more just and sustainable way, we do encourage you to go over to risetravelinstitute.org for more information on our educational programs. And we will be back soon with another episode. But until then, keep roaming, keep learning, and continue to be a Rise Traveler.